Puebla, Mexico, March 15, 2019. A 4-year-old boy walks through the corridors of the General Hospital with his mother, Maria Elena Vasquez. The little boy had just undergone emergency surgery after a domestic accident that almost cost him his life. The doctor said it was a miracle he survived, but what happened in the next 48 hours would forever change this family's life and challenge everything we know about life, death, and human consciousness. Because when little Diego woke up completely from the anesthesia, he was no longer the same child. His first words chilled the blood of everyone in the room. "Mommy, I died, but not here. I died before when I was Carlos." The bullet entered here and pointed exactly to his chest, at the level of his heart. His mother thought it was post-surgical delirium. The doctors tried to explain it as temporary mental confusion, but Diego continued. "I was 23 years old, it was 1987, and I was working at the Civil Hospital in Guadalajara. Do you remember me, Mom? Did you cry so much when I died?" Maria Elena had never been to Guadalajara. She had never met anyone named Carlos. And her son Diego, barely 4 years old, should not have known what year he was living in, much less specific details about a hospital 1,000 kilometers away. But this was just the beginning of the most documented story of reincarnation ever recorded in Mexico. A story that would involve doctors, psychologists, forensic investigators, and would be studied by the National Autonomous University for more than 3 years. A story that you are about to learn and that will forever change your perspective on the mysteries of human consciousness. Because what Diego would reveal in the coming days was not only impossible, it was verifiable. To understand what happened to Diego, we need to go back 3 days before the accident. Diego Vasquez was a completely normal child. He played with toy cars, watched cartoons, and like any 4-year-old, his biggest concern was choosing between chocolate or vanilla ice cream. He spoke only a few words of basic Spanish and had never shown any interest in hospitals, medicine, or anything related. He was the only child of Maria Elena, a 31-year-old seamstress, and Jose Vasquez, a mechanic. They were a simple, hardworking family who lived in a small apartment in the San Manuel neighborhood. Neither parent had any medical training. They had never lived outside of Puebla. But on the morning of March 12th, Diego accidentally fell from the building's internal staircase. He suffered head trauma and significant blood loss. Paramedics said he had stopped breathing for almost 2 minutes during transport. At the General Hospital, the emergency team worked for hours to stabilize him. The surgery lasted 5 hours. During the procedure, Diego went into cardiac arrest twice. Twice he was resuscitated. And it was exactly after the second resuscitation that everything changed. When Diego finally opened his eyes 3 days later, he didn't ask for his mother. He didn't ask for water. He didn't cry like any child would. He said, "Doctor, where are the other injured people?" "The shooting was very serious. I need to help." The head nurse, Carmen Morales, who has been working in pediatric emergency care for 20 years, says she has never seen anything like it. A 4-year-old boy using precise medical terminology, asking about multiple injuries and trauma protocol, was impossible. But the most shocking revelation was yet to come because Diego had not simply changed his personality. He had become another person with memories, knowledge, and a history that belonged to someone who died 32 years before he was born. On the 4th day of hospitalization, something happened that caused the medical team at General Hospital to stop everything they were doing. Diego was being examined by Dr. Roberto Mendoza, a pediatric neurologist with 15 years of experience. It was a routine examination to assess possible neurological sequelae from the trauma. Standard procedure. But when the doctor began testing Diego's reflexes, the boy looked him straight in the eye and said, "Doctor, you're doing it wrong. To assess post-traumatic neurological injury, you need to start with pupillary reflexes with direct light, then test the corneal reflex, and only then move on to deep tendon reflexes. It's basic neurology protocol." Dr. Mendoza was in absolute shock, not only because of the technical words spoken perfectly by a 4-year-old, but because Diego was right, completely right. It was as if he were talking to a fellow doctor, says Dr. Mendoza. He knew terminology that even third-year medical students don't master. He spoke knowledgeably about things that took me years to learn, but Diego didn't stop there. He looked at the doctor's stethoscope and said, "That model is old, doctor," at the Civil Hospital in Guadalajara where I worked, we used the Littman Cardiology Traceris, which is much better for detecting heart murmurs in polytrauma patients. Dr. Mendoza almost dropped the stethoscope. First, how did a 4-year-old know about different models of stethoscopes? Second, the Littman Cardiology Sera was launched in 1999, long after 1987, the year Diego constantly mentioned. But Dr. Diego continued, you seem worried, Etienne. I know it's hard to believe, but I really did work there. I was a second-year resident specializing in emergency and trauma. My supervisor was Dr. Hernandez. Miguel Hernandez had a scar on his left hand from an accident he had when he was an intern. At that moment, Dr. Mendoza made a decision that would change everything. He took his cell phone and called the Civil Hospital in Guadalajara, not to verify if Diego was telling the truth. That seemed impossible, but to prove that the boy was delirious. The answer he received made his blood run cold, because what he discovered on the other end of the line was not only possible, it was documented. Dr. Mendoza's call to the Civil Hospital in Guadalajara changed everything. On the other end of the line, the medical records secretary confirmed, yes, doctor, we have records of a resident named Carlos Mendoza Garcia, second year of residency in emergency and trauma. He died in July 1987, and yes, his supervisor was indeed Dr. Miguel Hernandez. And yes, Dr. Hernandez had a visible scar on his left hand. When Dr. Mendoza hung up the phone, his hands were shaking. He immediately called Diego's parents and explained the impossible. Their 4-year-old son had just provided accurate information about a doctor who had died 32 years before he was born. Maria Elena and Jose couldn't process the information. How was this possible? How did Diego know things that even they didn't know? And why did he insist so much that he needed to go home to Guadalajara? For 3 days, Diego became increasingly agitated. He didn't eat well, he didn't sleep. He constantly repeated, I need to go home. My family is waiting for me. They don't know I'm okay. It was then that Maria Elena made the most difficult decision of her life. If this can bring peace to my son, she said, let's go to Guadalajara. The 7-hour car ride was intense. Diego, who had never left Puebla, began giving specific directions as soon as they entered the city. Turn right on Juarez Avenue, now left on Morelos Street. The house is the third one on the corner, the blue one with the white gate. Jose followed the instructions skeptically. How could a child know the streets of a city he had never visited? But when they arrived at the address indicated by Diego, everyone fell silent. There was exactly what Diego had described, a blue house with a white gate and, in the front yard, an elderly woman watering the plants. Diego got out of the car, ran toward her and said, Mama Rosa, I'm back. It's me, Carlos. I didn't really die. The woman dropped the watering can because she was 74-year-old Rosa Garcia, and Carlos Mendoza Garcia had been her son, the son who died tragically in 1987 at the age of 23, the victim of a shooting at the hospital where he worked. The son she had mourned for 32 years and who now stood before her in the eyes and voice of a 4-year-old boy she had never seen before in her life. But the most disturbing part was yet to come. What happened at 237 Morelos Street defied any logical explanation. Rosa Garcia, still in shock, invited the family in. Her hands trembled as she opened the gate. Diego walked in as if it were his own home. Mama Rosa, you moved the living room, Diego said, looking around. The television was next to the window and the brown sofa was facing the wall, not the center of the room. Rosa almost fainted. How? How do you know that? I changed the furniture just 2 years ago. Carlos had died more than 30 years ago, but Diego continued to walk around the house with a frightening familiarity. My room was the second hallway on the right. The bed was under the window because I liked to look at the stars before going to sleep. He stopped at the door and said, May I come in? Rosa opened the door with trembling hands. The room was exactly as Carlos had left it. She never had the heart to touch anything. Diego came in and went straight to a drawer in the dresser. Here are my things, he said, opening the drawer. Inside were medical diplomas, a stethoscope, and a graduation photo of Carlos at age 21. And here, Diego pointed under the bed, is my emergency suitcase. Jose, Diego's father, bent down and pulled out a dusty medical suitcase. Inside were medical equipment from the 1980s, expired medications, and a hospital ID with the name Carlos Mendoza Garcia, emergency resident. But the most shocking discovery came when Diego went to the bathroom. Behind the bathroom mirror is an envelope, he said, with photos of a girl. I never told anyone because she was married. Rosa was confused. Carlos never told me about any girl. Diego climbed on a chair, removed the mirror, and exactly where he had said there was a yellowed envelope. Inside were 12 photographs of a young brunette with romantic dedications on the back to Carlos's, "With all my love." Ana Maria. Rosa began to cry. Ana Maria was a nurse at the hospital. She came to the funeral. She said they were just co-workers, but Diego wasn't finished. In the back garden, under the big mango tree, I buried a metal box with the letters she wrote to me. 10 minutes later, Jose and Rosa were digging in the exact spot Diego had indicated. 1 meter deep, they found a small, rusty metal box. Inside were 27 love letters from Ana Maria to Carlos, all dated between January and June 1987. The last letter was dated July 15th, 1987, 3 days before Carlos's death. It said, "My love, I can no longer hide this from my husband. I'm going to tell him everything tomorrow. If he forgives me, we can be together. I love you, Carlos." Diego looked at Rosa and said, with the voice of a child, but the weight of an adult, "She never got to tell him, Mom, because I died first." The next day, Rosa Garcia made a courageous decision. She called the Civil Hospital of Guadalajara and asked to speak to someone from the Medical Records Department. "I need information about my son, Carlos Mendoza Garcia. He died here in 1987. The records secretary, Mrs. Patricia Herrera, who had worked at the hospital for 35 years, immediately remembered the case. "Ah, yes, the resident who died in the shooting on July 18th. Terrible case. I have all the documents here." Rosa asked if she could come there with her family, including Diego. She needed to understand what was going on. 2 hours later, in the medical archives of the Civil Hospital, Patricia Herrera spread out on the table all the documents related to the death of Carlos Mendoza Garcia: death certificate, expert reports, witness statements, photographs of the crime scene. "It was an assault," Patricia explained. 2 armed men entered the emergency room at 11:47 p.m. Carlos was on duty. When they tried to take the controlled medications, he reacted to protect the patients. Diego, who until then had been playing quietly with a toy, looked up and said, "The man in the red shirt had a scorpion tattoo on his right arm. The other one was shorter and limped on his left leg. They didn't want to hurt anyone at first." Patricia was paralyzed. She slowly took the police statement from a nurse who witnessed the crime. 2 individuals, one wearing a red shirt with a visible tattoo on his right arm, shaped like a scorpion. The second, short in stature, had a limp in his left leg. The document had been there for 32 years, word for word, the same as what Diego had just said. "But there's more," Diego continued. "When the man in the red shirt saw me trying to protect Mrs. Esperanza, who was hospitalized with pneumonia in bed 12, he shouted, 'Get out of the way, doctor!' I said, 'I'm not going to let them hurt her.' That's when he shot me." Patricia, her hands shaking, looked for another document. The patient's statement. Esperanza Morales, 67 years old, bed 12, hospitalized with pneumonia. Dr. Carlos stood in front of my bed. He said he wouldn't let them hurt me. The bandit yelled at him to get out of the way. The doctor didn't move. Then the man shot him. Diego looked at the papers and pointed to a black and white photo. "That's Doña Esperanza. She had a rosary in her hand. She prayed quietly throughout the night. She survived." Patricia checked the records. Esperanza Morales was discharged 3 days after the incident. She lived until 2003. "That's good," said Diego, smiling for the first time since he arrived in Guadalajara. "She was very good to me. She always offered me honey candies that she kept in her nightstand." Rosa began to cry. They weren't tears of sadness. They were the tears of a mother who finally understood that her son had died a hero and that somehow, impossibly, he had returned to tell his story. But the hospital records revealed something even more extraordinary. What Patricia Herrera showed next left the whole family in shock. "Is there anything else?" she said, taking a special folder from the file. "Something that very few people know about." Carlos left a recording. It was an old microcassette dated July 17th, 1987, the day before his death. Carlos had a habit of recording medical notes on complex cases. This was the last recording he made. It was never included in the proceedings because, well, you'll understand. Patricia put the microcassette into an old device and pressed play. The voice of Carlos, a 23-year-old man, echoed through the room. Personal notes. Carlos Mendoza Garcia, July 17, 1987, 8:30 p.m. I had just finished my shift and I'm worried. Something strange is going on at the hospital. Suspicious activity in the controlled medications area. Two men were here yesterday asking questions about security protocols. Diego, who was playing with a pencil, stopped immediately and looked at the recorder. Yes, one of them had a scorpion tattoo on his arm. The other was visibly limping. They pretended to be inspectors from the Department of Health, but something didn't add up. I'm going to notify security tomorrow. The voice stopped. Everyone fell silent. Then Diego approached the recorder and said, "Can I speak?" Rosa nodded, still processing what she had just heard. Diego spoke directly into the microphone as if he were talking to an old friend. "Carlos, it's me, or rather it's us. You couldn't notify security, remember? They came back the next day, just when you were taking care of Doña Esperanza." Patricia turned the tape recorder back on, and what happened next was recorded and later studied by paranormal specialists at the National University. Because when Diego continued speaking, a second voice began to respond through the tape recorder. "I can hear you. How is this possible?" It was Carlos's voice, but Carlos had died 32 years ago, and the tape recorder was playing a conversation that was happening at that very moment. "It's possible because we are the same soul," Diego replied. "You didn't really You came with me. That's why I remember everything." Ana Maria received my letter. "You didn't die before she could tell her husband, but she really loved you, Carlos. She cried at your funeral, and Mom Rosa is fine. She kept your room exactly the same and loves you very much." The conversation lasted exactly 7 minutes and 23 seconds. It was recorded in its entirety by Patricia Herrera and later analyzed by forensic audio technicians. The analysis confirmed that there were two distinct voices, one belonging to a 4-year-old boy and the other to a young man, impossible to have been fabricated with 2019 technology, but the most impressive part of the recording was at the end. "Diego, I need to tell you something important about why I came back." Carlos's voice continued through the recorder, revealing something that would change everything. "Diego, I didn't come back just to say goodbye. I came back because there is something that needs to be corrected. Something that only you can do now." Diego moved even closer to the microphone. "What is it, Carlos?" "My body. They never buried me in the right place. There was a mistake at the cemetery. My tombstone is engraved 247, Section C, but my body was buried 50 meters north, engraved 312, Section D. No tombstone, no identification." Rosa was confused. "How can that be? I was there for the burial. You were buried where your tombstone is." Carlos's voice replied, "There were two burials that day, Mom. The gravedigger mixed up the bodies. The man in grave 312 is in my place and I'm in his." Diego then said something that left everyone speechless. "In grave 312, Section D, exactly 7.5 feet deep, you will find a brown coffin with gold fittings. Inside, in addition to the body, there is a graduation ring from the University of Guadalajara School of Medicine with the initials CMG engraved on the inside." Patricia Herrera frantically wrote everything down. How? How does a 4-year-old know such precise measurements?" "Because I am Carlos," Diego replied simply, "and I need to rest in the right place so I can continue in peace." But the most impressive revelation was yet to come. In the coffin, in addition to the ring, you will find a letter. I wrote it to Ana Maria the night before I died, but I never got to give it to her. It's in the inside pocket of the blue jacket I was wearing. 2 days later, Rosa obtained judicial authorization to exhume grave 312 in the Municipal Cemetery of Guadalajara. The coordinates provided by Diego were followed to the letter. At exactly 2.3 meters deep, the gravediggers found a brown coffin with gold fittings. When they opened it, the impossible became reality. There was the body of a young man in a state of preservation that was surprising for 32 years of burial. He was wearing a blue jacket. On his left hand was a graduation ring from the University of Guadalajara School of Medicine, and inside the ring were engraved microscopic letters, CMG. In the inside pocket of the jacket, exactly where Diego had said, was a sealed envelope with the name Ana Maria written by hand. Forensic tests confirmed that it was indeed Carlos Mendoza Garcia. The fingerprints matched the hospital records from 1987. Rosa opened the letter in the presence of authorities and family members. My dear Ana Maria, if you are reading this, it means that I did not survive. I want you to know that you were the love of my life. Don't blame yourself for anything and be happy. Wherever I am, I will be watching over you forever with all my eternal love. Carlos Diego, who had been watching silently, approached the coffin and said, Now I can rest in peace. Thank you for helping me get here. At that moment, something extraordinary happened. A deep sense of peace came over everyone present, and for the first time in 32 years, Carlos Mendoza Garcia was buried in the right place with his tombstone next to his family. But Diego's story still had one last chapter, the most important one of all. 3 weeks after Carlos's burial, something extraordinary happened at Rosa Garcia's house. Diego had returned to Puebla with his parents, but he continued to call Rosa every day. The conversations always ended the same way. Mama Rosa, I need to go back there. There's someone I need to find. When Rosa asked who, Diego always replied, You'll know when she arrives, Chin. You'll know when she arrives, Chin. And on the morning of April 15, 2019, exactly 1 month after Diego's accident, someone rang the doorbell of the house on Morelos Street. Rosa opened the door and found a woman of about 55 with gray hair holding a bouquet of white flowers. Excuse me for disturbing you, ma'am, said the woman. My name is Ana Maria Herrera. I worked with your son Carlos at the hospital. I heard they found a letter. Rosa almost fainted. Ana Maria, the nurse from the secret love affair, had returned after 32 years. Please come in, said Rosa, still processing the impossible coincidence. Ana Maria entered the living room and began to explain. I got married, had children, built a life, but I could never forget Carlos. When I heard about the exhumation and the letter in the press, I had to come. At that moment, the phone rang. It was Diego calling from Puebla. Mom, Rosa, she's here, right, Ana Maria? Rosa froze. How could Diego know? How? Because Carlos told me she would come today. He's here beside me. He wants to talk to her. Rosa handed the phone to Ana Maria, who was trembling. Hello, Diego's voice echoed through the phone, but the tone, the intonation was completely different. It was Carlos's voice. Ana Maria, my love, you are more beautiful than I remembered. Ana Maria began to cry uncontrollably. Carlos, is it really you? It's me, my love. I got your letter, the one from July 15th. I really wanted to meet up to talk about our future. Carlos, I'm so sorry. I should have told my husband sooner if I had. Don't blame yourself, Ana. You did what you thought was right. And I understand. I always understood. The conversation lasted 45 minutes. Ana Maria and Carlos talked about everything. The plans they had together, the children she had, the life he couldn't live. At the end, Carlos said, Ana, I need to ask you something. You have a 28-year-old son, Miguel, who is studying medicine, right? Ana Maria was startled. How do you know that? Because I've been taking care of him even without you knowing. He's going to graduate next year, and he's going to be an incredible doctor, just like his father. His father, Ana. Miguel is not your husband's son. He's my son. Our son. The silence was absolute. You got pregnant 2 weeks before he died. Do you remember our last night together in the apartment on Hidalgo Street? Ana Maria was sobbing. I always knew. Miguel has your eyes, your way of speaking. But I was never sure. He is our son, Ana, and he needs to know the truth. Not to destroy your family, but to understand why he always felt different, why he always wanted to be a doctor, even though there are no doctors in your husband's family. Carlos, tell him that his biological father died a hero, that I loved him more than anything, and that I am proud of the man he has become. When the call ended, Ana Maria was transformed. She had spent 32 years carrying a secret and could finally free not only herself, but also the son who never knew who his real father was. But the most impressive revelation was yet to come, because Miguel Herrera, Ana Maria's son, was at that very moment finishing his medical residency in emergency and trauma at the Civil Hospital in Guadalajara, the same place where his father had died 32 years earlier. Diego Vasquez's case came to the attention of Dr. Carmen Mendoza, a psychiatrist specializing in consciousness phenomena at the National Autonomous University of Mexico. For 6 months, she and her team meticulously studied every aspect of the story. Audio recordings were analyzed by forensic specialists. Medical documents were verified by 3 independent institutions. Witnesses were interviewed under rigorous scientific protocols. The result was a 247-page study published in the Mexican Journal of Paranormal Research in December 2019. The conclusions were revolutionary. The subject, Diego Vasquez, demonstrates medical knowledge that is impossible for his age and education. He possesses verifiable information about events that occurred 32 years before his birth. He exhibits abilities that challenge current models of consciousness and memory. But what was most impressive was what happened during the studies themselves. Researchers visiting Diego in Puebla began to report strange experiences. Some recounted vivid dreams about a young doctor. Others mentioned feelings of presence during the interviews. Dr. Carmen Mendoza confessed, "In 25 years of studying paranormal phenomena, I have never seen anything like this case. It's as if Carlos were really present, guiding the revelations through Diego." And in fact, Diego continued to provide information that proved to be accurate. He revealed that there was a secret file at the Civil Hospital in Guadalajara with unsolved cases from 1987. The file was found exactly where he indicated. Inside were 17 cases of suspicious deaths that had never been properly investigated, including Carlos's. He provided the full names and addresses of the 2 criminals who killed Carlos. Both had already died, but the information matched perfectly with police investigations at the time. He described with surgical precision the original layout of the Civil Hospital in 1987 before the 1991 renovations. These were details that only someone who worked there could know. But the most definitive proof came when Miguel Herrera, Ana Maria's son, agreed to take a DNA test. The results confirmed that Miguel was indeed the biological son of Carlos Mendoza Garcia. When Miguel learned the truth, he had a surprising reaction. "I always knew there was something different about me," he said. Since childhood, he had recurring dreams about a hospital with medical emergencies. "Now I understand why." The entire story was documented and is now part of the official archives of the National University. The case is studied by researchers around the world as one of the strongest pieces of evidence of reincarnation ever recorded. Diego, now 7 years old, continues to live normally with his parents in Puebla. Carlos's memories gradually faded away as if the mission had been accomplished. He still visits Rosa Garcia monthly. He plays in the garden where he once found the buried box, but now he is just a normal child without the memories that tormented him. Ana Maria reconciled with her past and told her family the whole truth. Miguel changed his last name to Miguel Mendoza Herrera and now works as a doctor at the Civil Hospital of Guadalajara, honoring the memory of the father he never knew. And Rosa Garcia, at 76, finally found peace. "My son came back to fix what was left unfinished," she says. "Now he can rest, and so can I." This was the first proven case of reincarnation in Mexico. But according to the National University, there are other similar cases being investigated throughout the country. Cases of children who remember past lives with details that would be impossible to know. Do you believe that human consciousness can survive physical death and return in a new body? The next case may be closer to you than you imagine. Yeah,